Let's talk about the what we call the Yom Kippur War and what the world knows as the October War. That's according to former President Sadat. Israel was attacked in 1973 on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It's called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Now, who attacked us? It was Egypt, it was Syria. In this instance, Jordan did not participate because apparently they learned their lesson in the Six-Day War, which took place 7 years before that, 6 years before that. In any event, the Yom Kippur War was considered by many a turning point in the Middle East for several reasons. The first reason is that it led to the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. The significance of that cannot be overlooked because it was, I have to give him credit where it's due, Kissinger, who had the foresight to move this even during the war itself. We had horrendous casualties during the Yom Kippur War. It was an uphill battle, and it was that for a very good reason. We were not allowed to make a preemptive strike, thus disrupting the Egyptian and Syrian during their staging of the attack. Had we been allowed by President Nixon to do so, it would have thwarted the ability of the Sadat and Assad to have such a tremendous amount of leverage. Now, we'll go back a little bit to the beginning of the war. You're saying, rightfully, so how come Nixon didn't allow us to make a preemptive strike? Well, Nixon was under the belief that in order to show that America is impartial in any war that Israel is forced on Israel, that Israel is not allowed to start a war, which would have been the case if we had been allowed to make a preemptive strike. We knew that the Egyptians and the Syrians were going to attack us. They were due to attack us at 6 o'clock in the evening on Yom Kippur. Now, Sadat, being a wise man, changed the hour. Instead of waiting till 6 o'clock, he changed it to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, what does it matter, these 4 hours? Very simple. It matters because the timing was so important for us to get our reserves out to the front lines. So they were delayed in getting to the front lines. Now, Golda Meir called up Nixon and said, "Hey, Mr. President, we need to defend ourselves. We know we're going to be attacked both by Egypt and by Syria. So therefore, we need to make a preemptive strike, as I mentioned, to disrupt their staging areas." Well, as I said, Nixon nixed it. Now, what are the results? The results are we had more than 2,000 dead. We had a very bad start. The fact that we won the war despite this, but at such a high cost. When you consider the number of Jews that were in this country in 1973, then you will realize that the catastrophic amount of dead and then wounded was unbelievable. But now let's go. Here we are in a situation where we are fighting, and we're fighting a two-front war. And then, of course, the Iraqis also came in, but that's besides the point. Here we are fighting, and we are bombing and shooting artillery with tanks and artillery, and we are, after a few days, we are running short of ammunition because naturally our generals were under the impression that they wouldn't dare attack us. I remember the atmosphere in 1973 prior to the attack, and the atmosphere here was they wouldn't dare attack us. We have the Israeli army. Had they say we have God, then I would have agreed. But I'm talking of the politicians and the army, the general said, well, we have the Israeli Defense Forces, so we don't need anything. So they let the tanks fall into disrepair. Some of the uniforms, and I don't want to go into the details, it's unnecessary. I will just suffice it to say that we were in a stage of unpreparedness, which we should never have allowed ourselves to be in. Here we are, running short in the middle of the war, running short because of the tremendous amount of shells that we had to lob against the Egyptians and the Syrians, that we are running low, as I said. So therefore, we need help in getting us supplies. Who is the best supplier for the Israeli army? The United States of America. So Golda Meir, who was the prime minister of Israel at the time, I'm not sure if she went to see him or if she telephoned him. In any event, Nixon said, yes, we are going to resupply Israel because we cannot let our ally falter. We cannot allow our strongest ally in the Middle East to be overwhelmed and run out of ammunition. Now, the United States went to these European countries and said, we, United States, cannot reach Israel with our planes at that time, in order to resupply Israel with the necessary hardware to continue fighting. We need a fuel stop somewhere in Europe and then continue on to Israel. Well, they approached the European countries, and all of them said, no, you cannot land in our countries. We don't want to antagonize the Arabs, and they will make an embargo of oil against us. So what did the Americans do? What did Nixon do? Nixon went and said, okay, do we have the right to land in our air base in the Azores, which belonged to the Portuguese? But America had the right to use the base as it saw fit, unlike the other countries in Europe. So America used the Azores to refuel its planes on their way to Israel with all the necessary hardware to be able to continue fighting. The war ended after horrendous battles. The Israeli army succeeded in crossing the Suez Canal to the other side. Arik Sharon, despite his later fiascos, was the general which pushed Israel to go onto the other side in the back of the Egyptian armies. And the third Egyptian army, was completely surrounded by Israel. Now, I remember saying when the Americans came to us and said to us, well, you need to be able to give water and food to the troops in the Third Army. And I said, no way, baby. Let them surrender, and then We will give them food, we will give them water, we will give them hospitalization, whatever they need, but let them surrender. Now, in comes Kissinger. Kissinger was, probably still is, I think he still is, a wise man. A man that realized that you do not want the Egyptians to be completely emasculated, to feel that they have lost everything. You want them to be able, at the end of the war, to be able to stand up and say, well, we didn't do badly at all. Why? Because a defeated enemy, you cannot talk to them. You can only dictate to them. Kissinger wisely said, we don't want to dictate to Egypt or Syria. Syria, not so much, but Egypt. Now, and the way to do it is for Israel to be magnanimous. So, without a surrender, we allowed the Egyptians to resupply the Third Army, to bring them food and to bring them water, without having to surrender. Now, this resulted in as far as we were concerned, we won. We pushed the Egyptians into a situation where they could not defend Egypt. We could have gone on into Egypt, into Cairo, as some of our generals were suggesting, and we could have done them a lot of harm. But wiser heads prevailed. So here we have we have a stoppage of the fighting, and we begin talks on what's called Kilometer 101. That's where the Egyptian generals met the Israeli generals, and we discussed how to get out of this situation so that no more fighting continues. Now, this talking, in the long run, remember, this was in 1973. In 1977, Begin, that's the leader of what today we call the Likud, meaning united, we elected Begin, and Sadat saw that Begin was the type of person that he could relate to. And then, I remember the days leading up to this event, which I will currently describe. This led to the Egyptians softening their stand and Sadat coming to Israel. The result of this coming to Israel and being allowed to speak to the Jewish people in our parliament changed the attitude of the Jews here in Israel vis-a-vis Egypt. Now, it did not change the Egyptians or the Egyptian population, but it changed the Egyptian political scenario in Egypt. And of course, the result is the peace treaty signed in 1982, between Israel and Egypt, a treaty that has lasted for all these years until today, and it is still going strong. Now, it was, as far as I'm concerned, Kissinger's doing, and give credit where credit is due. Now, what happened to all those European countries? This is the whole point that I'm trying to make. What happened to all those European countries who refused landing rights to the Americans as they were trying to resupply us during the war? First of all, you have all these countries. I'll give you a little listing here. What happened to them? First of all, France. President Pompidou of France, he died in April 1974. You have Prime Minister Heath of England. He lost the elections in February of 1974. Chancellor Willy Brandt of Germany resigned in February 1974 as a result of a spy scandal. Prime Minister Blanco of Spain died in a car bomb explosion in December of 1973. Dictator Caetano of Portugal was deposed in April 1974. Now, here you have a change in leadership in Europe, which is unparalleled in the history of the world. You had the major leaders, all those leaders who had said, no, we will not allow Israel to be resupplied from our bases here in Europe, meaning they would not allow American planes to land, refuel, and then continue on. Now, this is from Yom Kippur, 1973, until the next Yom Kippur, which is in 1974. None of these European leaders were in charge of their countries anymore. Now, you can come and say a whole lot of things, but one of the things that you can say is, wow. Because never in the history of the world have so many been replaced in such a short time, 1 year being a very short time. The whole idea that they could avoid, I'm talking about the European leaders, that they could avoid a Arab oil boycott wound up into nothing. They had an Arab oil boycott, which lasted for something like 10 years. The price of oil was astronomically high. So they suffered. So did America. Now, two other factors took place, which need to be noted here. First, President Nixon was forced to resign because of the Watergate scandal. Also, within this period from Yom Kippur until Yom Kippur, and the other casualty was Prime Minister Golda Meir, because the Israeli population had elections, and Golda Meir could not run because she allowed the Americans to dictate to us that we could not make a preemptive strike, thus killing a lot of Israelis that did not deserve to die. And of course, President Nixon, because he did not allow Israel to make a preemptive strike. And the ensuing Watergate scandal discredited him completely. The man was, anyway, from being president to being a garnished, nothing. Anyway, I hope this little bit of history will be taken into consideration. Bye.